good afternoon. I'm Brandon Ross. I am a network architect with TorryPoint. TorryPoint is a network consulting company. We do lots of big network infrastructure things, and one of the things that we really like to do are V6 rollouts. So we work a lot with service providers and enterprises to do V6 work, and so what I wanted to talk a little bit about today was things that you can think about and consider when it comes to doing some sort of IPv6 trial in your network. So probably one of the most important things, and this applies to really any big project that you're going to do on your network or really anywhere else, is don't try to look at it as a single thing. Try to pick little small bits that you can do at a time. Don't take on monolithic projects, because I think I'm pretty certain, actually, from my experiences dealing with our clients, that the overwhelmingness of having to do so many different things to make your network V6 enabled seems impossible. So break it down into little parts, and some of this presentation, what this is going to be about, is what those little parts might be for your network. Of course, there's a few common activities everybody should start with. Oops, I got to get used to this control. See, look at that, it like messed up my little process there. So first of all, you just heard this before in probably the last several presentations, build a lab. You've got to have a lab so you can try this stuff out in. You don't want to go and try to deploy V6 or anything else in your network without thoroughly testing it first. Stock it with identical equipment and configurations. Again, this should seem like common sense, but you have no idea how often I talk to people and they say, well, we had maybe MX 960s and Cisco 7600s in our core, but instead we put in an SRX and a 7200 because that's all we had access to in our lab, and it seemed to work there. Well, you know what? It's extremely common across vendors, and most people know this but don't think about it, to have dramatically different feature sets and especially performance, especially for newer features in the products across their product lines. So you've got to be careful to pick the same hardware and the same software and the same configs in your lab to make sure that you're not going to run into problems when you get to the field. So, if you can't afford to buy all that, well, you all bought that gear from somebody. Make them do it. Pretty much all of your vendors have customer proof of concept labs. Go to them, tell them what you want to test. Most of them will require that you put together a pretty comprehensive test plan of exactly what you want to do, but that's a good thing. It enforces discipline in the system so that you really think about what you want to test before you go in there, and they do a lot of the work for you. They'll wire it all up, they'll put the basic configs in place, so that when you arrive, you save a lot of time. All you have to do is kind of run through the test plan, see what the results are, and then take that back home. And of course, you could always hire a consulting firm to do that as well. A lot of our clients do exactly that with us, is bring us on to go ahead and run through those test scenarios and produce a nice fancy report that shows what worked and what didn't. So steps in order to do a trial like this. First of all, got to get IPv6 Space. I'm sure you've heard about that dozens of times today. I'm sure you'll hear about that tomorrow as well. Of course, so I'll skip through it kind of briefly, but you'd prefer generally to try to get it from your upstream provider, if not from your internet registry, especially if you're going to be multi-homed. Of course, you can always get it from a tunnel broker too, and while I wouldn't necessarily suggest using a tunnel broker for your production services, using a tunnel broker at this stage when you're going to do some lab testing and some proof of concept testing is very appropriate. And that's a really easy place to get some free IPv6 space that's quick to turn up and use as you need to. Of course, you need a connection to the outside world as well. Common sense says, of course, check with your upstream provider. Again, I know I heard earlier that there's some disappointment with how many of the major backbones support IPv6 off the gate, but many of them actually do. Some of them don't, there's no doubt. Growth is definitely slower than any of us would like, but you can get it, and it is there. And if you really just can't get it, and for some reason you can't maybe get a tunnel set up, you can still do your lab work without an outside connection. It's just kind of annoying and doesn't fully replicate the real world. But it can be done, and it's still valuable. So what to test? What are we going to do? That's important to do. And remember, we're going to try to break this down into small pieces instead of trying to take it as a holistic problem. But it's going to depend on what your business is and what kind of infrastructure you run. Are you like a publicly facing organization? Are you a website of some sort that would have some value in the marketing message? Hey, look at me, I'm V6, I'm on the internet. I know at least one guy in the room that's like that. How about just internal service for your employees? That can be a valuable way to go as well. If your employees are on V6, maybe some subset of them, then you can use them as almost as guinea pigs to see how it's going to perform for the rest of your organization. And of course, if you happen to be an ISP, the same thing for ISP clients. What you don't want to get to is the stage where, holy crap, you're out of addresses, now you have to do something, your hand has been forced, and there's nothing else you can do other than starting to roll out V6. So, I want the world to reach my website over V6. Why would we want to do that? Well, users of the website will probably get better performance over V6 too if they're also on V6, and that's going to become more and more true as time goes forward. You want to avoid NATs going out on, avoid CGN whenever possible. So if you get your site up on V6 before your competitors do, it's likely that your site will perform better. And it's probably one of the, concentrating just on the publicly facing website is probably one of the easiest trials you can do. You have to excuse me for a second. I've gotten this scratchy throat. The hotel I stayed in last night, I turned on the heat, which was not heat. It was just blowing cold air, and it was aimed directly at the bed. So now my throat is like ridiculously dry. So let's identify what elements we need in order to do a trial of V6 on our publicly facing website. Several manufacturers make load balancers that'll do V6, or rather V4 to V6 translation with you. I believe we have at least 2 of them sitting in the room with us right now, sponsoring this event. They're very good at it. You may already own one of their load balancers that are capable of doing this. And again, it's very little impact to your website. You really don't have to change anything on the website itself. You don't have to go to your website developers or your system admins or anything like that to make a publicly facing site trial work. So just get your V6 transit link from an upstream provider. Again, I probably wouldn't do this in a tunnel, but you probably could. You need one router that'll route V6 to connect to it. And that's all you need. Now, if you can't do any of that, there are actually some free services out there that are doing this translation for you. One of them that I happen to run across is called Cloudflare, but there are several others. And that's easy enough to go sign up. Again, I wouldn't put my commercial service through that, but just to do a trial to see if you get all the pieces in place, it'd be pretty easy. So put it in your lab, poke at it, see if it works the way you expect it to. Once you've gone through your lab testing and everything seems to work right, go ahead and do a parallel trial on your website. If you use a separate link, for example, from your upstream provider, assuming you're getting V6 directly from your upstream provider, you can really minimize or even eliminate any risk associated with V6 to contain any problems with V6 on the V6 website. And if you need to back out of it because something's going wrong, you just stop publishing your quadruple A record, and all of your traffic fails back over to the V4 the way it's always been. So, what do we have to do an internal trial? Well, first of all, we need desktops that support V6. Most modern ones do. Some don't. Some have problems, but those are the problems you're trying to work around anyway, because the chances are that you're probably not going to want to go and make changes to all of your users' desktops anyway in order to do a V6 trial or even to roll out V6 at the end of the day. And you need a DHCP V6 server, unless you want to, hardcode DNS servers, and a DNS server that understands quadruple A requests. And a lot of them do out of the box too. Of course, the most important part is getting some IPv6 transport into your network. Again, you probably don't want to use tunnels for this because you're talking about inflicting this on your internal users. But start small. You know, pick somewhere easy, somewhere small, with a controlled group of your internal clients that will give you good feedback and tell you what the experience is like. So do all that, again, put it in the lab and try to break it. So what are the considerations of different ways we can do this trial? We can do it as an opt-in, we can do it as an opt-out. If we do it as an opt-in and we configure users, what was I writing here? Some users we configure without v6, some users we configure with it. It's just a matter of whether they know it or not, or whether they've opted into it or not. These are your clients. So at first, I would generally suggest that you want to do an opt-in, let a few people who know what's going on experiment with it and give you feedback. But at some point, you're going to want to do something like a blind trial where you have some number of your users not knowing necessarily that you've set their machines up for v6. Because this is how we're going to determine if we're really ready for prime time. And then, of course, once you get to that stage, it's critically important that you accurately track your tickets, you accurately track your trouble reports from any users that have been enabled with v6 and compare them against some sort of control that have not, so that we can determine what the problems really are and try to resolve them, as opposed to just guessing. And this is probably one of the biggest parts that a lot of folks miss, and frankly, is harder than actually getting the technology in place, because it's a training issue for your support organization. If they do it well, you can get all kinds of great information about what's working and what's not. But if they do it poorly, you can actually get misinformation about what's working and what's not, and that's worse than none. So grow the service over time, do it slowly, track the issues, but keep in mind that if you need to back users off of it because performance isn't up to snuff or because you're having other issues, it's pretty easy to back off by shutting down RAs on whichever network segment is having problems, or on all of them even. So, what if you're an ISP? Well, that's harder. It's harder because you don't have any control over the customer's devices. Some of the most important things you need to consider if you're an ISP is what your CPE support is like and what your aggregation equipment support is like. Just because the vendor says, oh, sure, we support v6 means nothing. They may support all the standards of v6, but until you actually go and put it in a lab, see what the performance is like, which means running real traffic through it, you're not going to know for sure that they support the kind of performance you need. And more importantly, even if they say they support RFC 1111, you don't know that they support it in the way that you're used to using it in your network until you go and put it in the lab. So certainly in an ISP kind of environment, an opt-in beta is the appropriate way to start. You don't want to inflict things on your customers without them knowing about it. When it's relatively new, this is your livelihood. These are the people who are paying your salary. It's pretty universally safe to go and start looking at upgrading the backbone to a dual stack first. And then start pushing services out towards the edge as you go. But you want to keep things separate if you can, which might mean building a separate logical infrastructure. That's kind of what I just said. So once you get to that level, once you've understood it in a lab and know how to configure it, you can then look at possibly shipping a new CPE device to users who are going to opt into the trial. Tell them how to do it, how to hook it up, and most importantly, how to contact your support if they have a problem, and how to disable it if they have a problem. Comcast has been a really big leader in this in the last couple years. I've been happy watching them really push forward in bringing v6 to consumers. And again, the support organization is the most important and is often the hardest thing to implement. If you don't carefully track the issues going on with your v6 trials, you'll never learn from them. So ticketing and detailed troubleshooting, and also important is escalation to make sure that someone who really knows what they're doing is taking a look at these problems before they're dismissed, so that the root causes can be found is critical. I don't recommend doing an opt-out beta for ISP users just because of the complexity of the environment, and they tend to be rather fickle, at least not in the near future. But what you may look at eventually is selling a v6 service, right? A service that's not NATed is really what you'd be selling. So the next step after the beta would be a field trial. I suggest looking at, if you're an ISP, certainly, but it even applies somewhat in the other cases, looking at creating some sort of big red switch to turn it all off if there's a big problem. And this is really driven by the fact that we don't really understand yet what the security implications will be in v6. And that's from multiple levels. That's from a systemic point of view, knowing that it's not a new protocol, but it's a protocol that hasn't been exercised in the field as much as it has been. We know that we see a lot of attack attempts already on the v6 internet, and that's only going to rise. And we know that also the v6 stacks and the various protocols have not been exercised as well in the field, certainly as v4. So there's a lot of security risk there. So being able to shut it all off in case something really horrible is happening is a really good idea. It's going to depend a lot on the nature of your network on how you could do that, but just about any network you could figure out a way, whether it's dropping your external v6 routes and then causing your internal infrastructure to stop advertising RAs, or setting up a big old NAT. It's going to be different for everyone, but you might want to think about what your steps would be in case it all went wrong. And again, support organization is the key to measuring whether it's working or not. So what in the case where you run out of addresses? Well, don't do that. Start now. Really, don't run out of addresses. Are you really not listening? Don't run out of addresses. Do this now. Start a v6 trial now. If you did, well, most enterprises are probably doing that somewhere already. I guess what you might have to do is put more users behind the NAT to free up more v4 space for things that can't be NATed. If you're a service provider, start experimenting with carrier-grade NAT now. None of us like it. It is evil. Unlike the last speaker, I don't even think it's fun, but sometimes it's necessary. And knowing what the performance and limitations will be now is better than later. I'm guessing that it's probably going to be unlikely to find takers for an opt-in NAT trial, which is another part of the problem of doing a trial with CGN. So you might have to look for some incentives, like if you can win a free iPad or $10 off their bill or something like that. But set up the trial. Consider DS Lite, consider dual stack with v4 and CGN. But you're really in a corner once you're out of v4 addresses, right? There's really no good way to fall back, because once you're out, and you're just going to have to deal with what you've got. So I suspect that no one in this room will ever reach that stage just because you're in this room. I guess Owen stepped out of the room because he would have liked this little anecdote, but Owen and I are both pilots, and one of the things that they found in the pilot studies is that general aviation aircraft accidents are much rarer among people who go to seminars about general aviation safety. But what's the cause and effect, right? Is it because people who go to those seminars learn a lot and don't crash, or is it because, well, the people who go to the seminars are pretty conscientious and are probably not going to make those mistakes, and so it's more of a correlation than a causation? I suspect that that may be true of the people in this room. I hope you won't prove me wrong. So anyway, like I said, break the problem into small pieces. Don't try to look at this monolithically. That's how you get overwhelmed. Test like crazy in your lab with appropriate equipment. Look at your trial mechanisms that can easily be rolled back. Don't let yourself get into a corner, because that's where the real trouble is. And start now. I know you keep hearing that. Start now. You can fix it if you can deal with it if you start now. If you wait much longer, then you may be backed into a corner. Thanks a lot.